Hello and welcome to another tutorial, and on this one I'm gonna try to show how you would go about putting a CG object inside the scene where the camera is moving. And I'm gonna try to go over all the parts, starting with Nuke, with tracking the camera, then bringing in the camera inside Maya, creating a 3D environment there where you can render out your CG object, and then bring it back to Nuke again so you can composite those elements together. This process was initially taught to me by a teacher which I hold very dear called Will Maher, and was one of the greatest teachers I've had so far. And he was very good in this process. I've seen that a lot of people are struggling with this method, so I want to go over the way I do it. So in the end, you can have scenes that look something like this. So for the Nuke part, the very first part, what you want to do is you want to track your scene. For this example, I'm going to use the scene that I have used on my short that is also on the channel and used for my final for pre-production, Classe de Langueur CA. The very first thing you want to do is just go over your scene, and as you can see, mine is just like a movement backwards, and it has some reflections on this side over here. And the very first thing you want to do when you're tracking stuff is you want to get rid of anything that moves or is a reflection in this example. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything that's on this side so I can exclude it from the tracking. And the way I do this is I create a rotor shape. And then I'm just gonna put it all around the glass. But the camera moves, right? So I'm gonna have to move all these shapes as well. And all I'm doing here is I'm trying to eliminate as much as I can the reflection. It's just the way I chose to go about it. It's just to eliminate all the reflection. Now I don't know if you guys noticed, but I did use some tracking markers on the wall on the right, and that's gonna help us create a more solid track. So now I'm gonna go over how I create my camera tracks. The way I do it is first, of course, we create a camera tracker. But now I created this shape here, and I'm gonna use it as a mask so that, and use mask alpha. So now when I preview my features, you're gonna see that none of the features are gonna be inside the mask I created throughout the whole footage. And that's the next thing you have to do. Go over the whole footage, see if the features are there. I like to bump up the features to about, like, I don't know, 600, 800, just so you have more information to track on. And in the end, you're gonna have to get rid of most of them anyways, but it's a good starting point. So now what you gotta do is, if you did have the information of your camera, the lens, and all this information, you can set it here. If you don't know what it is, just leave it as it is. So leave it as a non-constant. I do know that this was shot in a DSLR 6D, and it's a video, so I'm gonna leave it at that, and it's gonna help a little bit the track. But that's as far as the information I want to go, because I want to show you how to solve issues when you don't know this information. So for now, we're going to use this track. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to press track. And now we have to wait. It's going to go all the way to the end and then come back. And when it does that, it's complete. So I'll see you guys in a bit. Okay, so now that it's done, what I want to do is go through the footage and see if it's forming these squiggly lines that show that in fact the tracking markers are moving throughout the footage. If they are, that is really good. That means it's working like it should. So the next thing you want to do is press solve, and this might take a while as well, but it's going to try to calculate all these tracking markers and see how they respond. So let's see how that goes. So now what happens is all the green points have been tracked successfully. All the red points they've calculated and got to a point where they saw that it errors at some point based on the settings that you have over here, which I did not touch. I left it as it was for this exercise. And all the points that are still the same color, it means that it just wasn't enough to calculate, so it's just unsolved. And the first thing we want to do is get rid of all these and leave only the green ones. So I'm going to do that by coming to auto tracks and pressing delete and solved, saying yes, and delete rejected, yes. Now your solve error is going to tell you how good your track is. You usually want to keep it below 1, so I'm going to try to get it a little bit lower. The way I'm going to do that is the first thing I'm going to do is press these 3 objects here and press refine solve. And in some cases what this will do is it's gonna, I don't know if it's gonna work on mine, but it should create some yeah, see, like it's gonna reject some other points, and now we get rid of those as well, and now it's a little bit lower. Now to refine it even further, what I try to do is mess with these values over here, the minimum length, the max track error, and the max error. And like a minimum length of 3, it just means that point over here is tracking on 3 frames, at least 3 frames. It's gonna keep it as solved. So 3 frames is not a lot, so we of course have to increase this. But what I like to do is press over here on the graph on the minimum length and the track min length, and it's gonna create this over here, this graph. So if I grow this over here and I keep it above the graph, I think that's kind of fine. But I'm still going to push it a little bit further till I see some points disappear in the graph over here, which I think it's fine because it's still got a lot of them. And I'm going to keep it over there. Maybe a little bit less. Because I see, like, for example, these points over here in the wall, they shouldn't be tracked because there's nothing there to track. But see how solid it is where the tracking markers are. So those are good. For the max track error, you want to click on the max track error and the error track. Press F over here. And then you want to bring it down so it's like below the curve. I'm going to go a little bit further again, so I get rid of more of those points. And for the max error, you want to press max error and error max. And again, bring this line below all the curves. So if it's around there, I think it should be fine. And now if I delete the rejected, see, my solve error has gone like way down. It's still not below 1, but for this example, I know for a fact that it's going to work pretty well. So I'm going to keep it like that. So the next thing I'm going to do is just show you guys real quick something that I learned from my new compositing teacher at Langara CA, Mel, Melissa Best. She's a great compositor, and I did not know this previously, but you can actually set the distance between points. So if you have measured them, you can select a point, like points, for example. Let's say if I know the distance between these 2 tracking markers, I could select two of those points, like just clicking them and then shift clicking the other point, and I can right click them, select a point, another point, right click them and press scene and add scale distance. And what this will do, if we go to scene over here, I have now this distance over here, and I could change the distance to the distance that you measured before. And so what this will do is when you do create the camera, it's gonna keep the scale correct. So if you bring your stuff into Maya, CG objects, everything will be kept to scale. But for this example specifically, I'm gonna delete this and I'm gonna keep it as is, because I do want to show you guys how to solve this problem if you have maybe forgotten to do this, or if you got a track where somebody didn't do this before for you, and how would you solve this inside Maya. Okay, so but if you have this, please do this. It's amazing, it works very well, and when you do bring it into Maya, it makes your life a lot easier. But just for the purpose of this example, I'm gonna leave it. I'm not gonna do it just to purposefully throw it off. So the next thing you want to do is select some points to be your ground plane. And the way you do that is you just select those points. For example, like over here where I can see the floor. I'm going to select these points. I'm going to right click, ground plane, set to selected. And now what you want to do is set this to scene plus and unclick this link output so that your camera is free, and just press create. So now if I look at my scene over here, you can see that I have my floor kind of set to the ground, and the camera moves as you would expect. You can see that from the points that this track is looking pretty solid. I have basically no points on my left side over there because I masked all of them. So that's exactly what I wanted to see, right? And now the way I test if this track is actually working is I try to place a cube inside the scene. Could be any geometry, but I'm gonna do a cube. And as you can see, it's quite big, so I'm just gonna resize it. I'm gonna try to place it at the beginning of the scene so we can see it. I'm gonna try to place it on the ground. So just gonna eyeball it right now, but I wanna try and place, see like if it's at least close to the ground plane over here. That seems pretty good. I'm actually going to reduce it a little bit more because I think it's too big. Now I'm going to try to place and see if it sticks right over there on the ground, which looks pretty good. So now I have that cube, and the way I place it on top of the original footage is with a little bit of compositing. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to get a checkerboard texture and I'm going to try to project it onto the cube. So what I do is I use a project 3D, and I'm going to try to project this texture onto this cube. And then whatever I'm doing on the 3D space, needs to be rendered back on top of the image. So I'm going to use a scanline render, which is going to turn whatever we do here into a 2D image again, so we can composite back on top of the original image. And as you will see, these two nodes require a camera input. So I'm going to get this camera over here, just going to copy it and paste over here. And we're going to connect these two things over here. But right now, the way it's set up, the checkerboard texture, it's going to be moving along. So it's not going to give a full 3D, an actual 3D experience, because if I just merge it now, you will notice that we can see that the cube, but the texture of the texture kind of moves inside the cube. And the way you fix that is, let's say I like the way it looks on this frame, right? So I can do a frame hold, and since it's 89, I'm gonna put it on 89. So now what it's doing is I'm getting this texture here and I'm applying it throughout the whole thing. So now it's going to feel more three-dimensional. If you look, it's going to look like it's just an object. And let's see if it's sticking pretty well to the camera. And see, it looks like it's sticking to the ground pretty well, right? Like if you see this edge over here, it's always kind of touching that area there. so it feels like the track is pretty solid. And basically what we're going to do now is just this, but with any CG object that you want. But now I'm going to get this camera movement that we can see like it's sticking, and we're going to bring it into Maya, and we're going to load up a CG object and just use this camera to our advantage. But before we can do that, there's a couple of things you need to do. First of all is I want to write the original image out as a JPEG sequence, or it could be a PNG sequence, just an image sequence, so that we can use it as a backplate inside Maya to see if the things are actually moving when we're trying to do the viewport, as we'll get to later. So this is the first thing you want to do. Write out a JPEG sequence. I'm going to do that right now. So I'm just going to set up a path. I'll see you guys in a bit. Just an important reminder, remember to use the hashtag when you're rendering out, so that you can have each picture be on a separate frame, so that when we do bring it back into Maya, we know what frame is which, and we have a better control of what we're doing. So right now I'm just gonna write it out. It shouldn't take that long. I'm gonna write out the full sequence, but if you're doing a specific project where you don't need those, what you want to do is you set your ins and outs, right? So let's say like if I only wanted from 50 to 100, I would just give an in over here and let's say to 150 and out, and then this is all I would render to optimize your workflow. But for now I'm gonna render the whole thing just so we can have like a better understanding of the way it works. So now I have written out the JPEG sequence, and I have it over here, and we can just take a look at it, see that it should look exactly like your original footage, right? And it does, so it serves its function. So the next thing you want to do is you want to write out what you're going to actually bring into Maya. And to do that, what you have to do is you create a write geo node. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect it to my scene. Okay, and now I'm going to set a path. There are two things that you need to write out. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write out the camera. So I'm just going to write out camera.fbx. And now my write geo should change to what you're seeing right here. And what I want to do is I want to turn off everything except the camera. And I want to hit execute. And I'm going to run through the whole frame range, because that's what we're going to use for the camera. And now that's done. And now what I want to do is I want to bring in the point cloud. So what we're seeing here, I want to bring these points inside Maya, so we have a reference to know where the ground is, for example. If we want to place certain things in a certain space, where would I place them, right? So I'm going to do that by selecting, I'm going to select the same, write geo. I'm just going to change camera to PC or point cloud, right? And I'm going to change camera to point clouds. And what's important to notice now is that you can do only one frame, and that's going to be enough. And that is because the point cloud doesn't change over time, right? The only thing that moves in this scene is the camera. So the actual environment just stays where it is. So all you need is just one frame for the point cloud, because it never changes. And okay, and this concludes this first part. Now what we're going to do is bring all this work that we've done over here inside Maya, load up some 3D model, and see if we can place it inside the scene. Okay, see you guys in a bit. Okay, so now we're in the Maya phase, right? And let's say I want to place this adorable little guy here, which I got off from the internet. I did not model it. If I wanted to put him inside that scene, right? How would I go about it? So we want to bring in what we created in the previous phase, being the camera and the point cloud. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to import. I'm going to see over here I have my point cloud, and I'm going to import the camera. Now if you notice, what happens is Ivysaur is this big, and my scene and my camera are this big, right? And that happens because, like I said before, I did not set the points, the distance between the points correctly. And the way I solve that is over here in Maya is I'm just going to create a group using all those points. See, all these points over here are each individual points. And for now, I'm just going to group all of them together. And I'm going to call them point cloud. Now I'm going to put this point cloud and this camera into a group of their own. And I'm just going to call this environment or something. And camera, whatever works. And now, having this over here, I can scale it up. I'm going to get this object over here, this group, and I'm going to just scale it up. Like a lot. But right now, the actual locators are super huge. So I'm going to select them individually. So I'm just going to select all of them. And I'm going to scale them on their own. So what this will do is just reduce their sizes individually, but it won't alter their space. So now you see I have a more realistic scene, but now I feel like I went a little bit too far. So I'm gonna increase this a little bit, and I'm gonna select the environment and reduce it a little bit, because I want him, like, if you see the scene over here, if you remember the position of the points, I think that this is gonna make him kind of like on the right size now, and I feel like he is on the ground right now, but I can position him a little bit better. So and now what we want to do is we want to select the camera and the camera shape over in the attributes, and we want to give it on an environment here an image plane. And what we're going to do is we're going to give it the images that we created for the JPEGs or the PNGs, and I'm going to do that right now. This image, right? So now if I go to this camera over here, I see that in the background, and I'm going to say that it's an image sequence. So now if everything is set up properly, what we should get here on your viewport is the camera moving accordingly and Ivysaur sticking into place. So I'm just going to play this real quick, and if we did everything right, this should be about it. So now you see that Ivysaur is sticking to its place in the scene, right? And so now you would go about building this the same way you would on a still scene. So you want to create geometries for the walls, that kind of thing, so it can create shadows. And what's helpful about this is that now you even have these locators to help you create these geometries. So you can use them as a guide to know where to put the floor, for example. Let me just hide the point cloud real quick right now so that you can see this a little bit better. Yeah, it's just playing at full speed right now. Let me just change this real quick. So there you go. See? To me, it kind of feels like he's floating a little bit. So it could be a matter of just like positioning him a little bit better in the ground. But then again, it could be, yeah, it could be just a matter of adjusting his position in space. And what I want to show you guys also is that, for example, if I just go back to my perspective, let me just call this the perspective real quick. And let's say I wanted him to move, right? So just like, I'm not gonna animate him, but just gonna move him in space so that you can see that it tracks well, like he could be walking on the floor. So I'm just gonna give him a point in space over here, and then I'm just gonna come over here and just move him forward. Okay, and just go back to the camera. So now you see that he's moving in space, and he's moving with the camera tracked onto him. So you have the three-dimensionality to him. So now you would go about this the same way you would all of the other objects. So I'm gonna do this real quick, and I'll be back when I have a quick setup, just so I can show you guys what it looks like in render, and how would you go about rendering this. I'll be right back. Okay, so now I have this very simple setup, which I won't go very much into how I created. I did talk a little bit about it on the video where I talked about holdout mats. What we get, it's just a very simple setup, just like two floors, and the one floor, two walls. One of them has a reflective shadow catcher, and the ground and the right wall don't. So you get something that looks kind of like this, and of course this reflection over here doesn't make sense, but the thing is, I would use it to create a reflection at least on the door over here. So I would clip it to so that it would stay there in compositing, right, and make it rougher so it doesn't look total reflective like this, right? But it's a good starting point. But if I just move this through, you see that everything kind of sticks, right? And it has that very beautiful alpha that we talked about before. Alpha channel replace over here, so now it looks totally fine. One thing I would do is I would set this reflection to 1. So what I would probably do is just click over and clean, because it's easier to bring it down than it is to bring it up when we finally render it out. And this is where you're actually going to render out, right? So only what's appearing on the alpha. So when I'm actually done with all this, I go to the dome light and I turn off the environment, and I have only this. And this is going to speed up my render like a lot. And what I'll do is I'm going to render this out, the sequence out, and just very briefly composite it together in Nuke real quick. But from here on, it's straightforward. I kind of touched a little bit about it on the holdout video as well. But this is pretty much the whole process of bringing in 3D image inside your live action footage. And I'm just gonna show you guys the final result now, and hope you guys enjoy it. Okay, now we're back inside Nuke, and all I did here was a very simple setup in which I have the render over here, and as you can see, it's moving with the camera, and I want to place it on top of the actual footage. And there you go. There's the whole process. I did do a little bit of tweaking here, just to adjust the shadows a little bit, and I took off the reflections because I didn't think it made a lot of sense, kind of thing. And of course this is not going to look perfect because there is no motion blur. I didn't really light it exactly properly, and there's a whole bunch of things that you could do to make it work a lot better. But again, this is just a simple example so that you can see how you would do the whole process. But so you get something that looks kind of like this. Then if you did have the whole thing, you would have something that looks kind of like this shot that I did for my short, where you can see it has the reflections, the shadows, and everything, and it's properly integrated. And aside from that, it's also animated, so it contributes also to make it look a little bit better. And there you have it, guys. I hope it helped, and I hope you guys are safe at home. So yeah, stay healthy, and see you guys soon.